Good evening, everyone. This is Paul Saraja from Minneapolis. Welcome you to our second in a series of The Imager and the Interventionalist. I had the pleasure of being joined tonight by Dr. Joel Cavacante. We're going to first do a little bit of intro in the slides, and then we'll dive right into Dr. Cavacante here. So this is, again, part two in this series featuring really world-class imagers in terms of what we do and how they make our lives better as interventionalists. And the CME, you can see the information here, the learning objectives, the accreditation. This is accredited for Category 1 credit. And as I mentioned, I really am honored to be joined tonight by Dr. Cavacante, who is the director of our cardiac MRI and CT structural lab at the Minneapolis Heart Institute, as well as the director of the core lab at the Minneapolis Heart Institute Foundation. And we'll learn a lot about where he is in his current role and how he got there. We'd like to thank our supporters, Abbott, Boston Scientific, and Medtronic for their gracious commercial support in making this webinar possible. If you choose to claim CME credit, you can find the login here, or you can go to our website and complete the evaluation form, and that will be good until 2023 for you to claim. Our next live CME webinar will be hosted by our coronary colleagues, and it'll be on atherectomy and calcium ablative therapies and peripheral disease with our endovascular folks. And please also set aside the dates for CVI 2022, which will be at the Hyatt Regency in Denver, Colorado, July 21st to the 23rd. And our webcasts can be seen on our website here. With that, it is really a great pleasure here to see and be here with Dr. Cavacante. Dr. Cavacante, he's holding a guitar.
Yeah, that was your idea, but this is a great guitar, and I cannot be more thrilled to be at your house tonight. We were talking about during the fireside chat.
Yes, this is the real fireside.
This is the real fireside.
This thing is hot. I'm like sweating here.
This is not a Zoom background or fake ones that you have seen, but this is the real deal. Just like what we're doing tonight. But I have a really honor. Congratulations for this very creative series that you have put together, and we're gonna have some fun talking about hopefully a little bit about music, but a lot about what we do together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we are featuring Dr. Cavacante and his colleagues in this series, and so I first want to start with Joel. Tell us. Where are you from? You're not from Amarillo, Texas, like me.
No,
I don't think you're from Minnesota.
No.
But tell us where you're from, how you got here.
Yeah, so for me, I'm from Brazil originally, northeast coast, a city called Fortaleza, about 3 million people, the capital of the state, 3 hours northeast from São Paulo, Rio. And I grew up there. I came to Minnesota as an opportunity to go to Wisconsin as a for exchange student, and that was the closest airport, and I spent 6 months. That was the experience that I wanted to have.
So your first exposure to the United States was the Midwest.
Yes,
so
indeed.
That's why you came back.
That's why I came back. That's what they say about the Minnesotans, right? Once they leave, but they come back. But being from Brazil, that was such a different weather contrast altogether, right? Because I leave there, it's 80 degrees all year long by the beach, and here I am. But it taught me a lot about, the opportunities that this would bring to me down the road. So I did medical school in Brazil, finished that. Actually, when I came back, my dad resisted a lot for me to come to U.S.
The urban legend is that you came back with long hair.
Yes, indeed. I came with the long hair, playing music, rock band, and I wanted to do psychology. And he was like, gosh, no, he's a psychiatrist. And he was like, I knew that the United States was going to screw him up. So here I am going to therapy to try to fix myself. And finally I said, he said, if you want to, if you like medicine so much as psychology, why don't you do medicine? You're going to be exposed to many things.
So did you want to be a psychiatrist then? Did you go to medical school wanting to do psychiatry?
No, I was more curious to see what that would expose me to.
Okay.
And here I am doing imaging, cardiac imaging, and being a cardiologist, which I have so much passion for it. But I probably would have been a good psychologist, but I don't know if I could, probably have that opportunity to be here. But that experience to be in the United States taught me that I could probably come back. I was exposed to that weather.
Well, I guess we had that in common because one little known fact about me is that I wasn't that great of a student in medical school. You kind of get there, you're going to graduate. I wasn't that great, but the one honors I did get in was psychiatry.
No, for me it was the hardest because him as my
I didn't even get honors in cardiology.
But for me it was so hard because he was my teacher at the medical school, and everybody thought that I had the upper hand, that I knew the question answers and everything. And it was so hard for me to pass that one. But,
you had to make sure there's no nepotism.
No.
So your dad was at the medical school.
He was my teacher was awkward because I like to participate. I raised one day the hand, and I did not know how to address. We'll call him by his name, by dad. I just threw out
by
the
his
question.
first name.
By his first name. So it was awkward to say the least, but I think, life is about, and the other teaching that he gave it to me was life sometimes is not just, if you want to get from point A to point B, it's not going to be always a straight line. Enjoy the curves of life, take time, and enjoy that, how it takes you, but be determined where you want it to go. And for me, finishing medical school in Brazil, I wanted to come back to the United States. Now I got excited for the US MLEs, started in Detroit, Henry Ford Hospital for residency, then chief residency, then cardiology there, was with Amara Guerrero and Adam Greenbaum at that time. And then Bill O'Neill was just coming, Didi Wong was just coming. So many of these luminaries are in the structural field. And then went to Cleveland Clinic for 2 years of cardiac imaging. And at that time, imaging, my wife, Kim, she's like,
what year was this?
So I'm finishing cardiology in 2010. Tells you how old I am. And 2010 to 2012 in Cleveland. And she almost she questioned me, my wife, and do you really need 2 more years of training? It's like, please, because, and she was the breadwinner, and we had already twins, and she supported that dream. And it was probably one of the 2 best years of my life.
So let's back up here. So you decided at some point that you wanted to spend 2 years imaging.
Yeah.
What was the inflection, or what was the spark that
that's a great question, because if you think about, there was no tower back then, right? There was MitraClip was just starting. Everest was at the tail end, and Samir Kapari and Murat Juju were the ones, and Jim Thomas was one of my friendly colleagues that taught me a lot, to Bill Stewart. The interest to pursue image was because I knew that could help patients identify disease. There's that jargon that says that
you didn't do it just because you want to tell me what to do.
That eventually came to be about the case, but I wanted to. I had the curiosity, Paul. I like video games. I like imaging. I'm stimulated by the visual aspects. And when I had a very good colleague from Henry Ford, Muaz Almala, who is at the Methodist now hospital, and he had done his training at the Brigham. He had just come back. He was showing me cardiac CT. There was a little bit of some MRI there, but I was not exposed that much. But CT for me was like eye-opening. Karthik Anand, also from Henry Ford, he taught me a lot about echo. But I said, they did not have imaging fellowship in Henry Ford. The only 2 places was the NIH and Cleveland Clinic. And at the beginning, maybe something at Ohio State. I was fortunate in Brigham, and I was fortunate to match at the Cleveland Clinic. And it was 2 great years, 1 full year of structural echo and intraoperative, and the 2nd year of CT and MR. It was a lot of training. So if you combine medical school, chief cardiology, imaging, it's a total of it's a lot of years. Let's not combine it. Yeah. But
but was that around? So 2010.
Yeah.
TAVR was not yet approved in the United States.
TAVR was not approved.
So, but it was in research trials.
It was in research
So
trials.
you had some inkling that might be needed in this field.
Yes.
Right.
We had coronary artery obstruction cases. We were sizing by TPE at that time. CT was just at the infancy for structural heart disease. But I knew that if we could deliver that and do it well, there was going to be a big potential. And then you have luminaries like John Leipzig, Nicola Piazza, and many others that carve the field. And it starts to become something that can stand little by little. Then I went to Pittsburgh. That was my first job out of fellowship, 2012 through 2018. And it was great 6 years. Did a lot of mostly TAVR, a little. And then at Pittsburgh was when I was in the cath lab doing clips. We started the program, we finished with 120 cases. It was a lot of fun. And then you invited me to come for a grand rounds here. And it was and John Lasser, who I have the greatest gift to be one of his mentees and work in my colleague and one of the best mentors that I could have. And it has been a great journey, 3 years now, 3 winters. But this is warm and this is a lot of fun. And that's
the backstory there is that John, we knew John is becoming more senior, and we needed a hot shot. And I said, John, you got to tell me what these hot shots are. Well, he said there's a Brazilian version of me, Joao, which is Brazilian for John.
Yes,
so you got to recruit him, but I don't know if he's recruitable. And so like we've been just so blessed to have you.
It's
here.
reciprocal, Paul. Yeah. It's reciprocal because you see, and one of the things that I wanted to come across as well is the importance that we always have outside mentors and friends. Today I got a couple of calls as well. We always try to help each other out. The community of the structural imaging, the imagers are a small but hopefully growing community.
Yeah.
But we have to look out for each other. Yeah. And it is great to see that when the progress of others, colleagues that are moving institutions, colleagues that are asking, hey, what do you think of that? And when you see that support, that you have it here, the integration, your career takes a different trajectory. Yeah. Not to say that they're not hard days. I mean, there are days that sometimes you go home, it's like, gosh, it was not a good day. But when the average and the balance is much superior, and the opportunities working with you, creating, participating in many trials, CoOp, and how having the imaging fellowship, because that's the mission, right? Yeah. How good it would be for us to just having fun here, but not train the next generation. I think that's it's something that I wanted to have.
We can't keep all the fun to ourselves.
No, we gotta bring more. And please, by the way, there is a chat function that I just learned a question. So if you have some questions, please feel free to type it in, your answers there.
I mean, so if you had a message for a young trainee or somebody who is kind of considering which area of cardiology or cardiovascular medicine they want to go into, I mean, what would you tell them about imaging in the current state and the future?
Yeah, it is. There is that jargon, right? If a picture worth 1,000 words, a moving picture, an image, how many more words would that word? In a 3-dimensional image, which we will see shortly here, worth how many? So I would say imaging is really a linchpin of many intersections of how we interact. We are helpful in heart failure, we're helpful in EP, we're helpful in structural, we're helpful in coronary disease, we're helpful as a general cardiology. I would say always, if you have that passion for it, and once you develop those skills, always look at the source images. I cannot emphasize that. As an imager, I need to see it. I don't need to look at the interpretation. I need to look at times to see how they were thinking, how we got here, but always look at the source image. That gives a different perspective. By just looking at the images, I already have questions that I'm going to ask that patient to confirm or refute what I have. And so it is an exciting field, as you can probably tell, and particularly the CT and MRI domain. is an aspect that we need to continue to push. We still have a large, lack of access for trainings. You have cardiology fellowships out there that they finish the fellowship.
I mean, how many advanced imaging fellowships are there? Do you know?
There are less than 2 hands, good ones.
So how does somebody get the training? I mean, if I'm busy trying to get my echo boards, nuke boards, I mean, how do I go about that?
So that's the other nonsense thing, right? You have to do many boards. So you finish cardiology fellowship, and this is a moving target too, that they are trying to change what they consider the CoCat's level of competency for not only numbers, which is very arbitrary, but for something that would be much more palpable, like you check boxes. Do you know how to assess a patient that has aortic stenosis? What are the features here that you have to identify, much more than just numbers? Classify the subtypes, etc. To your question, how do I find out where these advanced imaging programs are? It depends. There is not a central website that you can go. ACC has something in the imaging section that provides you that. But within that, there's going to be different categories of programs. There'll be programs. Cleveland, they still have the 2 years, like I described. There'll be other places that will be just a 1 year of MRI. There'll be years that there'll be other programs.
And there are even shorter programs, like 3 months.
Those will be.
Is it possible to learn this in 3 months? I mean, I just have to ask.
It's hard. You're not going to have the depth necessary. You're going to be acclimated. You're going to do some TAVR analysis.
Even if you pick just one modality, like if you come 3 months CT or 3 months MRI.
3 months CT, you can learn. If you wanted to do coronaries and you wanted to do aortas, pulmonary veins, you can do well, and you can do even some TAVRs. When it starts to get much more complex, when you go for paravalvular leak, like we had one today that we had to really give the guidance to you, or mitral, tricuspid.
He's trying to tell me I screwed up.
No. Well, with our guidance, with our eyes, it's like you said to me once, it's like cheating work with. And that's not cheating. It's just that you give the right path. But there are many programs. In one other aspect of imaging is structural imaging. How should that be constructed? Is it TEE and CT? Maybe less MRI, or should that be CT and MR? So there are many permutations of that. And a question that, and not a question, but a point that I will make for the audience, for those interested, it's great to call multi-modality imager, but in practice, it's impossible for you to practice well more than 2. 3 is a stretch. So even though I look at some nucleus, but I don't read, but I know when to ask for a test. You need to know the indications and etc. But it's hard for you to keep focus and keep good at for more than 2. So think about that.
I mean, when I listen to your story, I hear a passion for skill sets, because you really came into this field before we had TMVR, really before we had TAVR. Microscope wasn't commercially approved, but you saw something in imaging that you loved, and you saw that spatial connection to it. It must. I'm just listening to this, and you just kind of fell into this amazing evolution of devices and imaging together.
And there is a great story that I might have told you before. Once it was TCT in San Francisco a few years ago, and a few years later, Crossfit Adam Greenhouse said, "What are you doing?" We always talk about music. By the way, he plays bass guitar really well. He said, "I thought that you were doing, I thought you did imaging." I said, "But you need us, don't you?" It's like, yes, I guess you're right. We need imaging. So it's funny to see how the application of that came to be so important for the betterment of these patients, right? For how we can safely screen and do procedures much better, and also improve on patient selection, because we can fix valve disease, but there's a lot behind that we might need to understand as well, and if we wanted to move the needle forward.
What's the connection to music? I gotta ask, because he called up this guitar out of my closet and tuned it before we went on camera here, but Well, what's the connection?
Music is actually my outlet. Music is what keeps me grounded as well, along with my family, my kids, my wife, our traveling. But music, I had bands back in Michigan, back in Cleveland.
You're on Spotify.
On Spotify, yeah. Garden of Souls or Echo Chamber.
We should do a chat and like take requests for I don't know if I can open this chat. We could see what we can play here.
No, but music for me is so good, and you appreciate music too. So we have had a lot of some guitar parties here, and it's something that kind of unites us. For me, it is, everybody has their hobbies, right? And for me, one of them is music. And
so you play guitar. And what else?
Bass guitar and some piano. I started with piano, but piano was hard to transport.
Yeah.
And then learn acoustic guitar, Brazil bossa nova, and then rock. And then
those long hair days.
Long hair days. Yeah, 1994. I was here, Kurt Cobain, but it's fun, and listening. And I also appreciate new artists. Things that Spotify sometimes brings it over. It's like, gosh, this is so good. But it's fun to see people that appreciate music too, because it actually gives you satisfaction to share. Hey, have you? Oh my gosh, this is so good, and it's fun to get that feedback.
And you sing too.
No, I
don't sing. He does sing. Trust me. Relative to me, anybody sings. He really does sing.
Well, I guess depends on your reference, but it's fun. And your wife as well, Abby, loves music too, and so we have fun times. And I think that's the other advice too for those listening to us. It's a lot, not just about the job, but it's about the group. It's about the people. Right? It's what it's fun when this goes not only here but also at work, that you challenge me. Yeah, and I push you back sometimes.
So how is that? So that's one thing we haven't touched upon, the heart team, and the imager functioning within that. I mean, how do you find your role?
You find your role by being prepared. You find your role by understanding what the needs are.
And you have to talk to the proceduralist too, right?
And you have to talk to the proceduralist in the same language that you would understand. So that teaching that I had with Conrad Smith at UPMC and Bill Katz, guiding them for a mitral clip, that is fundamental when we do a clip case together, a TMPR together. So the same language. But I also love when you come to the CT room and you pose me a challenge, and I said, okay, what do you want? And I give you the mouse. I said, so this is what I wanted to see. And that opens up my eyes. I see now what he's trying to get to. And if it wasn't for that perspective, I would not have thought the same way. Now, next case it comes, now I understand what exactly you need. So that dialogue comes with openness, by trust, by knowing that I don't know specific things that you know, and vice versa. And that respect is something that is not so easy to find in many places, but that's another quality of a good place too. Again, it goes back to the people.
The humility. Right. The humility and the intellect and everything, the respect that goes with it. And just admitting we don't know, right? I mean, that's just part of it.
Yes, it's part of it. And be humble to always learn. And this is the great fun to ask sometimes questions. And if we don't know the answers, we're going to find out.
Well, I'm going to give you his phone number when we're all done, so it's going to be good. So are you going to play a song now, or are you going to play one at the end?
Well,
what is the plan here?
So you asked, this one is. You might recognize this one. And I'm not going to sing.
What's really great is that this year CVI is going to be live in person for the first time in a couple of years.
Yes.
And I cannot wait to be there with you, and I fully expect you to walk up on stage and bring your guitar.
No,
and then we'll do these fireside chats there too.
We can do it there. Yeah, it's It's so good to be back in person. I mean, I remember the first one that they tried was the TBT, right, in Miami. And that was such a bold move. And I remember the meeting was happening outside of the meeting rooms because last time I saw you was this and that. And it shows how much we prayed for this relationship. We're going to see our team tomorrow. And, you know, there's going to be a TMVR workshop that we are putting together on March 20th. So this is going to be a pre-conference, one day. That we're going to be teaching all of you interested on how to do the segmentation analysis on this field that is growing. And
that's open to anyone, right?
That is open to anyone. So you pre-register for the, you know, for the website. That the link should be, the website should be up very soon. But please mark your calendar, save the date for July 20th. That is going to be a Wednesday pre-conference for a full in-person TMR workshop, because we did 3 times over Zoom. It worked out quite well, better than we anticipated. But
it's going to be great because I'll be moving the mouse, and in person you will grab my hand and tell me it's ready to go. Should we get into the content for
Let's
tonight?
do it. Let's do a little bit.
Yeah, so wonderful just hearing about you, and we do have some content to share with you. How you help us be better. Do you need me to take the guitar? I'm not going to strum it.
Oh,
you okay?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. Okay. So I thought about, you know, just covering a few highlights and actually having this interaction with you, because that's when we learn more. But in this field of mitral and tricuspid intervention, so some disclosures of our core lab services and also investigator for Summit trial, which I'll be covering here. So when we talk about the spectrum of TMVR, there's a lot that CT.
Right? We do. Yeah, it's an evening, guys. So cheers.
So cheers.
Cheers.
Yes. Yeah. So when we talk about TMVR, there's no doubt that CT plays an important role, right? And that's how we assess the safety and patient capability to undergo this procedure. This is a recent document showing not only for native, for bioprosthetic, but for valve and ring, you need to do a proper CT acquisition, which we're going to go into details at the course. But obviously, do the segmentation. A lot of work that Philip Blanke from Vancouver, British Columbia, and John from Leipzig, and Didi Wang, and many others have also let us really learn on how to best understand the dynamism of the mitral annulus, as well as the dynamic changes that the new LVOT.
I just have to ask, so I mean, this is an amazing article. I mean, it really is quite comprehensive. Now, just looking at those images, I mean, what software? I mean, what capabilities are required for this? Can I just like get my PowerPoint slide and incorporate this and draw? I mean, tell me a little bit how you do these and what's required.
No, and that has been actually a barrier. I have given a couple talks to South America, and they said that's one of the limitations. If we have a patient with a failed valve, we have a patient with MEC, but we don't have this software. Right now, I have been outsourced to do that. It is a software dedicated. You can try to do it multiplanary formats, but it's not the same, because you need to create really this segmentation of the mitral annulus, which is 3-dimensional in its nature. You see the anterior horn. And when you segment the mitral valve prosthesis, yes, you can get an idea with just the circle and the circumference and the phenotype that is going to look radiographically on CT. But when you do the simulation of the new LVOT, that you need to see what is the residual area, that becomes quite complicated to do in a standard 3D platform. So you need a dedicated software.
It's quite impressive because the spatial resolution is really just so important, and also the temporal resolution.
The temporal resolution too, so important, right? These patients have atrial fibrillation. You got to be able to freeze motion. You got to be able to really identify what part of the cardiac cycle should you go for in systole, as it was in the beginning, or should you go a little bit mid systole when there's still blood leaving the left ventricle cavity. At this document, we said to mid to end systolic phase, as you can see here, because we believe that end systolic is too conservative, and you're going to screen out patients that you could probably treat. Now, valve is another domain that our colleague, right, Vinny, another blessing that we had, that you were able to also have a big influence in his recruitment, from Colombia. But, he has taught us that, there are differences in these prostheses, even though there's a valve, porcine leaflets are short, and there is a little bit of space because these leaflets curl, whereas pericardial leaflets, they go all the way to the end. And any space for someone that has a small new LVOT is going to be important, right? And so there are differences. Rings are much more complex, depending on this capability to circularize, to provide enough anchoring, and a lot of oversizing because you need to flare this valve into the ventricle. And bands are not adequate the majority of the time, particularly if they're incomplete.
So I gotta ask, okay, so you go back to this slide, I think, the semi-rigid.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's gonna change shape once it goes in there. So, I mean, as an imager, how do you anticipate that shape change?
Yeah.
And because in the LVOT, it's gonna be different, whether it's a triangle or a circle on the left-hand side.
100%. And the other thing to account for is something called anterior mitral valve leaflet. And that anterior mitral valve leaflet, when should you preemptively do lampoon, which is the next one? Should you lacerate because you don't know how it's going to go, so that you open the cells here, the blood can pass? Or should you go only if the anterior leaflet is above 24, 25 millimeters? Some centers have a lot of experience. They go the tip to base and pull it back to the ring, and then you can lacerate it safer. Others do alcohol septal ablation to kind of remodel the septum and have more space. But your point is well taken. How is this ring going to respond? It's only going to be learned if you take notes of how much pressure, what was your pressure in the balloon, and your post-implant CT, right? Because you got to learn how things.
So do you model for worst case scenarios here?
You always model for worst case scenario. And you always have to model as this prosthesis becomes fully expanded and some degree of flaring. So 30%, 25, 30% atrial, some flaring, and then you simulate what is going to be the residual new LVOT.
I'm going to put a log in there because this thing's like hissing at us.
No problem. Calcification of the mitral annulus for MAC is important. This is a seminal work from Myra. And again, this is using a TMVR, non-dedicated TMVR device, using an aortic valve into the mitral valve. It's important to have a higher MAC score, but also it's important to oversize quite a bit so that you can anchor this valve. And the better anchoring would be if you have involvement, obviously, of the trigones, much more calcification, and involvement of both leaflets. Now, this is you, man. So I'm curious because you were thinking really outside of the box here. So if you have not recognized, this is a tendine in mitral calcification.
It's the first one in the world. This is the very first one.
So this is a completely compassionate use. Nobody has tried that. Take us through this journey. I mean, how did you get to do this?
So this was fall of 2016, and we had done, I don't know, probably 15 or 16 tendines by the time. So the team had been really well rehearsed, and we were really quite happy with the tendine. It was outperforming everything we had anticipated. And this patient was from Fargo, North Dakota, and it was a surgical turn down. The surgeon called me and begged for an option. I said, well, not sure the sapien is going to work because the neo LVOT looked a little compromised, but the tendine, as you can see in the top right, it's this D shape. And that D, that asymmetric shape, is what gave it enough neo LVOT. And this had never been done before, and there were people who said this can't be done and told us not to do this. And I said this patient had no option, and we got to try something. So we used a balloon. And it was my first time ever dilating a valve that looked like this. So
what balloon can you use?
So what we did is we did put on a rail. We used an inaway balloon on a rail because what we wanted to do, and tendine was not it had a sheath at that time, so you had to swap out for the sheath then the valve. So we wanted to be able to do that quickly, so we put on a rail so that way we could then go right in with the sheath and right in with the tendine if we tore this valve.
We tore the valve,
And I didn't know how this valve was going to respond to a balloon. So what did I naturally do? I gave the inflation to my partner. So Mario Gesso inflated the balloon, and you could hear a pin drop because no one knew if this annulus was just going to like completely break in front of us, if it was going to tear, what the spicules are going to do. But it went so well, he did it twice. Played it once and said, let's make sure it opens again. Played it again, and then we put the valve in, and the rest is history. So it was really amazing. And it's November 2016. I remember it like yesterday.
Wow, November 16th. And this is history because you take through this first, first in women case, and you fast forward now 5 years, and you see 6 years, and you see now the Summit trial, which is enrolling now, and this arm is almost closed.
Yeah. We might be enrolled by the end of this year or early next year. It's really amazing to see something compassionate use based come into the trial.
Yeah. And I think, this is a huge unmet need because not all valves, not all necks can be treated with a sapien valve. And, and you look at the safety that this has provided, especially that low profile feature that Tendyne has, it's quite an advantageous one that is much less real estate. The other one too is the Medtronic, which is on the trials now, and there is a mech arm as well. You had experienced this when it was the beginning street, right? The transapical approach. Now they have the transeptal. Differences that you would say, transapical access, what are the features here that you would?
I think the transapical access is a little bit different, but really largely the same. The Tendyne valve, the access point permits you because of the tether, and so wherever you poke, that's going to be the orientation of the valve. This one, it's a little bit more self-orienting, so it's a little more forgiving with the apical access. But in terms of where you go, it's pretty much the same. You want to get perpendicular to the clavication planes, which you guys give us on the CT.
Yeah,
beautiful. So.
And what's your prediction now that this is moving to transfemoral, transeptal? Is this going to be advantage, or what are your thoughts?
It's wide open because the issue with the transeptal versions is that they tend to be in the smaller end of the size matrix. So for instance, Tendyne goes up to 1,500 square millimeters. If you think about that in the context of a sapien, which is supposed to be 660, Tendyne goes 10 got really big because it's TA.
Yeah.
And so the TS versions will have to somehow match that size matrix to really take them. There's no question that the TS versions currently in their current size work extremely well. The question is about the market segment beyond that. So it's very exciting. Medtronic's experience with TS and Truck has just been amazing.
Yeah. Been working really well for Azar. That was in Pittsburgh too. Congratulations. Yeah. And this is another interesting thing that we had the chance, couple of years of myself and Dr. Miho Fukui, who we were grateful to recruit, bring along from Pittsburgh here. We looked at from Japan,
Pittsburgh,
Minnesota,
the center of the world.
Yes. And with Allison Duncan and Dave Mueller too, and many others, that we started to look into this pre and post. So for you to understand how things work, you got to have the comparison. And in this particular case here, even though you have that apical pad, you would expect the majority of these patients would have a reduction in the end-diastolic volume. What we saw is that some patients actually dilated the stretcher, they had the lateral move. And it turns out that actually the further away from the true LV apex, the worse was not only the left ventricular remodeling, but the left atrial and the left ventricular mass regression.
It's really, it's somewhat counterintuitive in some ways, because one might think if you push from the apex, you gain sphericity, right? And if you push from the wall, from the sides, it might be a little more benign. But I think it's got to be related to the annular descent.
It is, and you have to respect anatomy. The segments adjacent to the pad don't like it, so sometimes there is an upward move as a compensation for that incredible tension and pressure that the pad might exert.
Do you have a way of looking at apical twist?
Yes.
And that, have you seen that with the pad and the location?
Yeah, so it's hard once you have the pad in front of it because it blocks you from seeing it. But in these cases here, we can still do, and she had done analysis of strain as well, that might tell us a bit about, the preservation of that if you go with the transeptal route versus you freeze that apex in the presence of the transapical. On the other hand, with that being said, there are patients in which this PED might be beneficial, right? You have therapies like the bioventrics, the left ventricular remodeling, right? What they're trying to do, a transcatheter aneurysmectomy or pull it in. Could this PED be advantageous for ones that have this big aneurysm? We still need to learn more. It's not truly apical, but periapical, but something that we need to.
But it's interesting because the pad and the tether, they're on constant tension. So when we put these in, we go 20 to 50 points higher in pressure. And so that way that it's always under tension because we don't want it to ride up in diastole. So that's why I wonder if this annular descent has something to do with it, because you're anchoring the apex and you're really pulling the anus down, which is kind of the natural motion, at least in systole, right? So it's not necessarily diastole, but in systole, it's kind of this twist down.
Yeah, you have that longitudinal movement towards the apex, and the apex is frozen. Whether or not you will be able to not only do a better contractility, but also be able to relax. I was surprised that despite the mitral regurgitation reduction, the left atrium did not change so much in these patients, which speaks to probably this adequate unloading. But we are looking at a larger cohort now, and it's going to be fun to learn. But again, the importance of pre-pose, right? That you have to do. Just quick switching gears for this conundrum of proportion, disproportion MR patients with CoOp. The framework that Paul Grayburn proposed was that they had some LV dilation, but there was much more mitral regurgitation. Therefore, the main driver was MR, not LV dilation. Whereas patients with mitral FR, they had much greater LV dilation to a lower degree of MR. So, the problem is the ventricle, not so much the MR, but fixing the MR might do some benefit. And of course, as any Venn diagram, you have an intersection.
But there's some controversy.
There is.
Because there's a paper that kind of came out after this said that, well, if you use regurgitated volume, they're actually proportional, whereas EROA, it's disproportionate. So it's the story makes sense, right? I mean, if you have a bad LV with little regurgitation, TripleClip isn't going to help that much. But I mean, how do you really go about measuring MR in these patients?
It is really tough, Paul. And I gotta say, especially after you flip the clip, it's a really and I think that I will propose that we might have a camera that might provide you some good answers to it, and that's cardiac MR, because it not only is about the amount of MR and the LV remodeling, but the amount of scar that these patients have. And the outcomes are going to be dependent on all these three components. If we just look at these two here, we're going to miss out a big importance of that. And this is a technique that is not, breaking news here. It's already well established in the MRI community. Late Gelman enhancement, which sees the scar, you can quantify. So in MRI, everything is quantified. It's not, guessing work. So this ventricle should have squeezed 122 as a short bump through the aorta, only 76 is what cross. So you do the delta, that's the regurgitant volume. You get regurgitant fraction. And with that, then you can probably try to understand why CoOp being so successful as it was, despite MitraClip and GDMT, still 54% of these patients were non-responders. And it's either death, heart failure, hospitalization cases, you change. Now you could say, I'd rather be on the 54 than be on the 74%. But it's still, a big proportion. That's not related to the MR reduction that was able to be achieved.
But a lot of that is, and to be fair, it's we know that CLIP improved death, improved heart failure, hospitalization. So that the non-responders, it's a KCCQ that we're after, right?
It's heart failure, hospitalization,
it's a lack of change.
Yes.
And so it makes sense if you have a bad LV, you may not feel better after just a CLIP. And I think that's the hard part. So how do we go about looking at the LV? I think that's where really this disproportion argument comes back. I mean, how are we supposed to be looking at the LV in addition to the mitral?
Yeah, and when you think about the metrics that we currently have available for echocardiogram, we have what volumes, we have ejection fraction. And volumes difficult by 2D, better for 3D. We have ejection fraction, we have strain. These are all surrogates of function, right? Behind the function, underneath the function, there is a structure, there is a composition of that muscle.
So everyone gets an MRI?
I don't think that we need to get an MRI, but everyone should. We need to explore MRI for the perspective of combining some of that MRI data to develop a scoring system that we can learn about some features from the MRI that will inform echo. You see, it's not going to be feasible to everyone, but I think in this, as the stakes are higher now, as we continue to expand this treatment now to intermediate risk, we can and we should be doing a therapy that is so groundbreaking and bringing the same assessment of not only the mitral regurgitation but of the ventricular disease. We have therapies for that now. We have SGLT2 inhibitors. We have other things that were not so widely used in CoOp. Can we do a better job of treating the ventricular and the valve disease?
Absolutely.
Right.
And I mean, you go back to medical school, right? So AS causes pressure overload. You relieve the AS, you relieve the afterload, and they do better. Here, MR and LV dilatation. LV dilatation happens, then MR happens, and then they beget each other. So you try to interrupt this circle, but if the LV is enlarged, you haven't changed wall tension, and therefore you haven't changed afterload. And so the prognosis is hard.
It's hard.
And so that, I think that to me is kind of like, how do we know which ones are going to have an effect of afterload reduction with MR therapy? And that's where I struggle, because with AS, the clinical trials are moving earlier and earlier. TAVR unload, progress, expand 2, which hopefully will be launched. These are all moving
upstream,
less severe valve disease to see what effect it has in a direct way on LV. But MR, I mean, we've already seen data and hints of it that if the MR is not that bad and the LV is bad, correcting the MR is not going to help.
That's true. And in the same way, too, if you have a lot of MR, but you have a bad ventricle, you can fix that MR, but the fate is going to be determined already by what that ventricle is. And sometimes, that's why even with CoOp, with mitral clip, almost a third of these patients progress to need a beverage, progress to end-stage heart failure. So we need to think about that. Not only about the mitral disease, but also the ventricular disease in the right ventricle too, because these guys have bad LV. The right ventricle is the set tire, as I tell my patients. If that RV is not so good, that might be quite different.
So you're going to cover some tricuspid stuff.
Well, yes.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So in the tricuspid space, it becomes really hard because that's the comment. We talk about triluminating the substudy, and people said, "Oh, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?" Because they have AFib, they cannot breath hold, they have devices, they have low GFR, but this great teamwork that we're able to do.
Wait, which person am I?
You are probably,
I think I'm raising my hands.
You're his hands. I'm somewhere in between, trying
You're
to
still
help
helping people up.
Yes. But it's been great because now we are 70 patients out of 100. So getting to the tail end, 10 sites recruiting. And so great. We have a text group that we share best practices. We bring industry too, and that has been a great journey to really be able to image these patients.
So this is a sub-study.
A sub-study.
Triluminate pivotal trial.
Correct. And I have a couple of slides here just to fast forward because of our time. But the first thing that I was trying to really be able to see was, can we see leaflets? Because if I can see make us see leaflets, we can probably understand better. Of course, you can see always the leaflets on TE, but can you see that by CT? And to look at the anatomical morphology of that valve, to try to measure this hole. This is the biggest valve in the body, and it's unbelievable.
So Joel, I mean, look at that image. If you think about like the true view, and you know, Philips eyes or Philips 3D echo. I mean, how can I get this image from the cath lab? I mean, seriously, because the understanding of the clefts and the folds and where the coarctation planes. I mean, this is like looking directly on it.
It is directly on it. This is the right atrial view. It was, you know, eye-opening to me that we were able to do this, a completely serendipity, and great protocol, great scanner for temporal resolution too.
And how much contrast is this used?
So this patient probably would have gotten somewhere between 65 to 75 cc's of contrast.
And can you gauge the right and left? You did it all in one shot?
So yes, and that's the idea, is that when we do this, we wanted to get some left-sided contrast as well, even though preferentially is on the right, because the left side is important. These patients have mitral valve disease, and etc.
So if somebody's getting a left, this is just again, I'm
Sure.
If somebody's getting a left-sided scan, can they just reset the timing to capture right-sided things as it's passing through the IV?
So no. So if it depends. So when you wanted to assess mitral tricuspid, which one is the most important? You're gonna get both contrast on both. You can. You have to extend your contrast injection a little bit more, so that you can have, and you're going to inject more contrast because you keep pushing the contrast to the left, pushing it to the left, because it's going to come first to the right. On the tricuspid, one of the models that we started with was low and slow. So inject not too fast and inject low amount of contrast, because that TR is going to be circulating the contrast. So it doesn't move that much. By the time it reaches the left side, you already have enhanced quite a lot. So the TRD is somewhat forgiven. A good patient, you inject from the right, and then whoop, goes into the left. So if you only have one shot, pretty much, you don't have like two passes. You've got the right, now you got the left. You don't have the time to do that. So for you to be able to have nice biventricular enhancement, you've got to make a choice. You're going to enhance more the left or the right. So you're going to enhance more the left. You got to keep pushing. You enhance more off the right, but you want to sum on the left, you trigger on the left atrium just as the contrast is coming, but you still have a lot of contrast on the right.
So how do you image? Okay, how do you?
Image? This is just physics.
How do you image for the mitral when somebody who has severe TR?
That's a good question. So I would image pushing more contrast. So I wanted the left side to be quite enhanced, but you can always see the right side. You don't want it to do a very high rate saving flush injection that will disappear the contrast from the right. I still need some contrast on the right, but I wanted this contrast to be moved quickly to the left side.
What if I just came into the CT lab and put a catheter in the right atrium for you? Would that be helpful?
It could be, and to maybe you minimize quite a lot, because there's still some real estate that you need to cover.
It's just something to think about.
Yes, to think about. But that's how we manage the contrast and dilution too. So the dilution helps out not only to decrease the amount of contrast, but not to make it so bright that it becomes hard, because you need the iodine to go down. So some work that our scholar here, Bernardo Lopes from Brazil, did was looking at this hole and contrasting with the echo best in class measurement, which is the 3D vena contracta area by TEE. And we saw this excellent correlation between these two methods. So that's another flow independent measurement of TR severity by CT. And that had a stepwise increase.
And you're doing this at the clip too?
It's hard to do at the clip. At the clip, I have tried, and a couple cases you can get by, but the artifact of the clip, it obscures for you to see. So the residual TR, and that's a good point. It's much better seen by either TEE or even by MRI. In MRI you can do it nicely, but to see the whole after the clip, this is another area too that we're starting to explore, is what happens with these leads. Is the lead just a bystander, or is the lead actually at the commissure that we need to mobilize as we try to clip, or is the lead impinging completely the septal leaflet that we need to definitely do something about? So sometimes you got TR, that the lead is there, but it has nothing to do with the TR, just a bad dilation. But we need to understand much better the interplay, right?
we struggle with that sometimes on our TriClip calls. Just trying to see where the lead is, and also the subvalvular interaction.
Yes.
Because even if you have a left-sided image on echo, the lead can be going right into the subvalvular, which is hard to pick up with those, because it's being pinned down.
Yeah.
So like the micro, you've had an image with the micro leadless pacemaker.
Yeah.
You think that, do you have one in here?
I think I have probably the next one. There you go.
There it is. So this is great. So why don't you take us through this?
So
This is interesting.
This is an interesting one, right? So this patient had a quadricuspid tricuspid valve and had a lead that was impinging the septal leaflet. The lead was removed, and a micro leadless pacemaker was placed, and it pulled the papillary muscle, so the leaflet cannot come in.
Yeah.
And
so we removed the lead, thinking that the leaflets are just gonna, the lead will get out of the way and we can probably clip it. But the micro actually pinned the subvalvular apparatus so that we can't pick up the leaflets. So
exactly.
So the leadless pacers, I mean, they think theoretically it should make things better, but here when it's implanted and it wraps and spaghetti wraps the noodles, in the subvalvular.
Yeah, these tines. Yeah, you gotta respect the anatomy, and I think I have another picture here too. That's another.
Yeah.
So, patient has a TAVR, patient has severe TR, being evaluated for Intrepid. Could there be an interaction between that micro and the Intrepid?
Yeah.
So, so it shows just, how much we still need to learn. The planning, so even though it's a tricuspid valve, sometimes it's bicuspid. You saw tricuspid with 4 leaflets, you saw with 3 leaflets, saw with 2 leaflets. And the planning on also the best angles and the clip strategy for the gaps. This is a case that we did at the TCT, showing this quadricuspid valve, and 3 clips were placed on the yellow lines that you see in a patient that had AFib and can still get beautiful anatomical representation and evaluation of that. Bernardo also did some work on the tricuspid, looking at the EFS triluminate, that a leaflet therapy pulls in the annulus. So the annulus is less fibrotic and regains this concave convex shape, and as well as reducing the tricuspid regurgitation and the obviously LV remodeling.
I mean, that's really provocative. I mean, because people talk about how the mitral tier can pull in the AP dimensions in the mitral. But I got to think that it's even more pronounced in the tricuspid, because there's really technically no tricuspid annulus, right? I mean, it seems to be more pliable. And that image right there in the middle, that septal ladder dimension, I mean, look at that.
Look at how it becomes saddle shape.
Yeah. And how many clips was that with?
So that one was with the 2 clips.
2 clips.
Yes, the 2 clips.
Yeah, and that's the average too.
So, yes. So, and you can see, the anatomical regurgitant orifice there before, and the clips after, and the reduction on not only New York Heart Association class, but RV remodeling. And to finalize, just this work that, we have had the chance to be doing together with the pivotal imaging Substudy, got CT and MRI baseline at 30 days and then 1 year to really understand, how does echo fall TR, what are the parameters of the RV that we should be looking at. And as I said, this journey, I mean, you got 10 sites, they're highly motivated. Earlier this week, we had a case from Cleveland Clinic that got approved, so thank you. Now that last week we had Innova, had another case, so everybody's contributing now. Now it's coming, everybody wants to be in. And everybody thought, so if we can deliver on tricuspid, we can deliver in any valve. We should probably not have started with tricuspid, but so it is. And so it is. So it's fun to do cases like that. I mean, another micro, there you go. Patient with mechanical mitral valve, micro TR, you have a small scar in blue. You have a lot of tricuspid regurgitation, 58 mLs, 56%. You clip now 3 clips, you got the micro there. It's actually, I would say that the image on the left here, the CT, is much easier to understand than on the MRI. But you get, more importantly, a significant TR reduction and RV forward flow. So the LV can expand better. The patient can feel better because there is much more forward cardiac output. And I think that's what, I would like to invite you all for the course that we talked about on July 20th. And thank you again, Paul, for this.
Oh, it's fantastic. Fantastic. Wow. Well, I mean, that was just amazing. I mean, again, you're keeping us honest. So,
So
I mean, yeah, I mean,
and vice versa too, right?
well, you're telling us what's important. You're showing us how to do things, and I mean, can you really measure 2 mLs compared to volume? I want to know this. Is it really, I mean, what is it? What is? Come on, give me the truth here. What is the inner observer reliability of that amount of measure?
So for tricuspid regurgitation, and we have adopted clinically. So what we did was measuring atrial fibrillation, measuring flows and volumes on MRI in atrial fibrillation. So atrial fibrillation is hard for any given image. It's hard for echo, it's hard for CT, it's hard for MR, right? Our variability. How do you do with echo? Well, you average multiple cycles. How are we going to do with CT? Well, we have probably, sometimes depending on the scanner, 1 heartbeat or 2 or 3 heartbeats. How are you going to do with MRI? Well, the MRI, you have the luxury of taking 20, 30 beats. Okay?
So in other words, you're perfect.
No, we're not perfect. you come up with the best solution, and you hope that is going to. So we started with this clinically and said, we're going to be doing TR, and we might as well test. Our lab is busy. We do devices, we do AFib. Let's try this, and we start to get consistent measurements. I said, okay, then we can do it. Now, after clinical, it becomes much more challenging, but we are able to have a consistent, by the way, we do 2 flows. It's a longer protocol, but again, it has taught us that we can deliver this. All these other trials have excluded patients with pacemaker, have excluded patients with AFib. So we don't have a representative. What are these TR patients? Do they exist? Yes, they exist, but they are not the representation of who we treat. We wanted to take all comers. Yeah. And so it's a bigger challenge, but a lot of reward. And good to see that we can do this not only here in Minneapolis, but many other places, which is where the fun begins.
So give us 10 seconds of what your workshop at CGI is going to cover in July.
Yeah, so a lot that we have covered today, tonight, with ability to really have a one-on-one with direct hands-on experience. It's going to be Paul Saraja, Dr. Vinny Bapat from us, Chad Kingler from Lennox Hill, myself, and we're going to have a lot of fun discussing cases, valve in valves, valve in rings, valve in MEC, which are the 3 FDA approved, or at least on the registry for the valve in MEC, and a little bit of some TMVR. But after that day, you're going to have a lot of the resources and the framework on how to do this segmentation. And I look forward to seeing you all there.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, Joel, it's been a real pleasure.
Likewise,
do you want to send us off here? And we'll close it. And I want to thank you all for being here tonight. And hope you enjoyed this. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. And also this coming July at the live course. Thank you all very much.
See you all. Have a good night. Thank you again for joining us.
Bye now.